What is up, everyone? We are here. We are good to go. It is the first episode, the maiden voyage, if you will, the first time around the block. We are here. We are going to be doing this brand new podcast adventure here. My name is Brandon. I'll be joined here by Jesse and Chris. We like to call this little ditty Behind the Riffs. We're going to take a deep dive look into some of the greatest albums in metal history. Jesse, Chris, that's our brief overview. Welcome, you guys. What is going on?
Hey, how's it going, Brandon?
Just another day in paradise.
Are you in the Paradise City?
Um, where the grass is green, right, and the girls are pretty. That's the one.
Right. But it's
Yeah.
more like but it's more or less cloudy though, probably where you guys are at.
At the current moment, yeah.
And the grass is green, but it's also tall. So that means I must need to mow my lawn.
Right. Well, guys, welcome. Here we are. We are three guys. Obviously, we all have musician backgrounds here. You two guys are currently in the scene there up in the Seattle metal scene. And but beyond that, we're all just fans of music, and we're going to be trying to bring as good of a detailed look at this stuff as anybody out there, and we hope that y'all enjoy it. Today, guys, we have a very tall task because we're starting it off quick. We're starting it off with a bang. Of course, if we're talking about metal and metal albums, if that's what Behind the Riffs cornerstone, what the heart of Behind the Riffs is going to be talking about, obviously, between the three of us, we decided that the best place to start would be the first Black Sabbath record. So here we are.
I mean, we're a better place to start than the beginning, right?
It's definitely, depending on who you ask. I mean, there are people that'll argue different things for argument's sake, but I think anybody that knows the true answer will say yes. This is indeed kind of this is indeed like the birth of metal. There are some precursors, of course, and the roots of everything in there, but this is essentially where it all comes together. So this is the place to start, right?
Absolutely. There's so many metal bands that are out there now that even that we consider legendary that go back to saying that Black Sabbath and that first Black Sabbath album, had it not been for them and that album, they wouldn't exist at all. So absolutely.
So I mean, we're looking at back in the days, the wee old days of 1968, 1969. Chris is going to kind of take us into a kind of a view of the world at that time here in just a moment. But before we go into that, I just wanted to basically mention about when we're talking about Black Sabbath and like you said, Jesse, just the influence that they spanned across the industry. That's definitely indeed why we're doing this first, and definitely an interesting record from four lads from Birmingham. So Chris, why don't you kind of lead us into just, where were we here at the time, around the formation of the band, where were we in the world at the time? Kind of take us into that picture, if you will.
The I guess probably the most notable world event going on at the time, obviously, was we're kind of smack dab in the Vietnam War. We're still a few years off. Sort of the peak, even maybe kind of jumping of the shark of the flower power movement. Something that the band themselves, all as the individual members, have mentioned has sort of been something that they've sort of pushed against, the ideal of, you know, peace, love, et cetera, et cetera. The 69 would have been Woodstock, and I believe Altamont would have been right around that time too, which Altamont's sort of looked at as it's sort of looked at as what ended up killing the flower power movement. Yeah, it would at the very end of the year. Actually, Altamont would have happened right after they recorded this first Sabbath album. And another kind of interesting thing to kind of think about more kind of locally to them at the time was just as they're kind of getting into the studio and starting to record, they're getting together, they're jamming, they're getting ready to, you know, going from the transferring from Earth to Black Sabbath. It's also not insignificant to point out that that's around the time the Beatles are starting to record their last album. Let It Be, I believe, was recorded right around the same time. So it's kind of there's a little bit of a transference going on, a little bit of there's a change in the winds, so to speak. And you know, just kind of combing through, seeing like outside of, you know, the hippie movement and Vietnam War, just trying to I was trying to sort of get a gauge as to what really was going on in the world. A lot, the Sabbath seems to be less shaped by world events at that very moment, more shaped about their direct environment, Birmingham. Birmingham, England was an industrial town. They were still even like 1970, so we're talking like, excuse my rough math here, you know, 25 years after the war, they're still cleaning up. Economically, they were on a little bit of an upswing, but still, like there wasn't much you had to choose from in terms of where you worked. You basically worked the mills, and that was about it if you're hoping to make any money. And none of them wanted to be stuck working the mill, so they tried various musical projects, and they took a little bit and a couple name changes, but they eventually found each other.
Yeah, it's just very interesting to just think about the world in that time. And of course, you know, we could probably draw, and, you know, I have, you know, all sorts of parallels to modern day. You know, when you think about the political unrest of the country at that point, I think it's only logical, you know, to draw a lot of the same parallels, you know, to present day, and we will hear that in this record. And, you know, we'll get to that when we break down the tracks individually. But there is definitely there are some political pieces in there, you know, in addition to all the other imagery and stuff like that that's going on. So
Oh yeah, for sure.
pretty good stuff, Chris. Um, so kick it over to Jesse here. You know, we're going to talk a little bit about, and Chris kind of delved into that part a little bit. But, you know, going back, just kind of setting up the brief history of Black Sabbath, you know, forming and, you know, as Earth, and then into the first record. I believe you have some, you know, the good info as far as that stuff goes. So why don't you take us into that?
Yeah, so you know, one of the things I really liked about these earlier time periods, not only just with the Black Sabbath album itself and that band, but just the time period in which records were really made by bands during that time. The vibes were so different. The way you made music was different then. Not only was it a reflection of what you had going on around you, necessarily, like Chris was alluding to, whether it be a political environment or just your economic environment, but just the way the technology was and the expectations within, you know, the industry at the time, and things are so different now. albums released so different. Lengths of albums are so different. This record was relatively short. It's only 38 minutes and 12 seconds long. And, we listen to a record that long now, and we think unless it's like a progressive record that's got like maybe 4 songs that are like, a Dream Theater song that's like, one long epic thing, we go, wow,
Right.
that's really short. We almost kind of have ADD and wonder like what's wrong if we see a record that's that short. But it wasn't uncommon back then. Songs were about 4 minutes long, and it wasn't really hard to write songs like that back then. That was just normal. Um, it was recorded in one day, one 12-hour session, on October 16th, 1969, at Regent Sound Studios in London, England. It was produced by Roger Bain, who went on to produce bands like Budgie and Judas Priest, bands we've all heard before, especially if you paid attention to Budgie and think about Metallica and some of those B-sides. It was engineered by Tom Allen, who also engineered Judas Priest, Loverboy, Def Leppard, Crocus, Kix, band Rough Cut. And then Barry Sheffield also did the engineering on that. And it also was released on February 13th, 1970 on a label called Vertigo Records. And they literally went in, recorded it in one session. There was really no overdubs. They were all set up live. Ozzy was in a vocal booth, and they all just kind of went at it at once. And with the exception of one double-track guitar, I believe that Tony Iommi said that they did on Nativity in Black, everything was straight up, no overdubs, no double tracks. And that was really, you think about that now, it's kind of unheard of. It's not common at all.
Oh, for sure. Everything's so polished and.
Yeah.
I mean, even with Doom, like certain Doom albums, which, Doom sort of taking direct lineage from Sabbath, like even modern Doom, they'll have their share of overdubs, and in that specific genre, there is a very much a devotion to, playing as simple as possible. So not playing as simple as possible, but trying to keep things as simple and lo-fi as possible. And it's just like that is crazy to think, just going in and cranking out 40 minutes worth of music in 12 hours in the studio.
And yeah, back then too, you had to be so good to do that. I mean, playing live all the time really wasn't as hard as it is now. Like, right, you and me, Chris, we know how hard it is to play live. We know we're in a band, so it's not always easy to get in because there's so many bands now. That's where it was back then. But man, they played 5 nights a week, maybe more.
Right.
So they,
and that's like, and again, that's in a major city. Like, I mean, even back in the day when Brandon and I used to have a band together, it's like, man, if we wanted to play a show down in Roseburg, we had to rent out a place, and so it's like you're basically building up a show every 3 months.
Took an act of Congress, really. You had to
exactly.
give them your firstborn, and then maybe you could play a show. It was
sign here in blood.
Right. But I mean, think of it this way: like in it's easy for a band to get basically get like a gig every day of the week, but in like nowadays up here, it's like a lot of venues, even up here, they have their 2-week no play clause, where it's like you can't play in the city for 2 weeks after a gig with us or blah blah. It's like back then they were a little bit more, and in that area, and I'm sure they probably had a little bit more, random pick of the litter with the clubs, but
well, yeah, and then the desire also at that time, the music scene to go see live music was so different then. There was no YouTube. There was, you want to see a band or hear a band, you went out after work. It didn't matter if it was a Wednesday night. You went out and you saw that favorite band, and they played so much that it probably wasn't really hard for them to go in and lay down 40 minutes of music in one take or two, because they had their skills down and that song down so well.